to the program. I am Omini Udan. Nigeria's budget, funding majorly dependent on crude oil sales, vary regularly depending on the forces of demand and supply on the international market. Nigeria is not alone on budget deficits, as developing and advanced economies suffer one form of shock or another. Nigeria's budget in 2020, for instance, was based on an anticipated oil price of $57 per barrel, but economic contraction came with the outlook of COVID-19 pandemic at the tail end of 2019. COVID-19 ultimately affected the global economy negatively, and Nigeria is not an exception. Indeed, Nigeria's budget is usually based on about 70% dependence on oil, as oil prices dived, leading to review of budget in March 2020, and subsequent government revised the benchmark to $30 per barrel in 2018. It becomes obvious that government had to borrow and resort to other ways to fund the budget. In 2021, Nigeria's budget deficit is projected at 5.2 trillion, again attacked by global economic crisis and domestic impact of COVID-19. To close this deficit, it implies borrowing and looking at other sources of funding. Perhaps this informed the decision of the Federal Inland Revenue Service taking up the leadership in search of effective budget funding in Nigeria. Our business tonight on the program is beaming a searchlight on various ways of funding the national budget. But first, let's take a listen to this background report put together by Benny Adams.
The anthem today is, "The world will overcome the COVID-19 pandemic."
Let us arise with faith and strength.
Like a thief in the night, the coronavirus has continued to steal the health and wealth of nations, leading to Nigeria being hit with shrinking oil revenues and rising debts, and further complicated by tax avoidance. Revenue from tax has suddenly become bailout for government revenue distributed monthly to the three tiers of government at FACA meetings. Then comes the need to raise more revenue to fund the 2021 13.6 trillion naira budget of economic recovery. The budget has an aggregate revenue target of 7.99 trillion, 36.9% higher than 2020, which was 5.84 trillion, with 70% of the revenue to come from non-oil sector, while the oil sector is estimated to provide 30% in the composition. The burden of actualizing this lies squarely with the country's tax body, the FIRS. Realizing they can't do it alone, they sought expert views. Widening of the tax base, mitigating compliance risks, reform domestic tax laws and institutional frameworks, increase capacity for tax audits, tax management, business intelligence, and encouraging voluntary tax compliance were some of the chiefs experts brought to the fore. How is the FIRS planning to go about this?
2021 will be full with deployment of e-services and the process to stratify taxpayer for one-on-one handling is being put in place.
While one talks about automation and data-centric as empowered by the 2020 Finance Act, the other is on indirect taxes.
Take, for example, your income tax or your payee. Your payee, once they remove it from your salaries, you feel it, you know it. People do their best to avoid it. The company's income tax, that's a company we have to come and file returns, and we determine profit and we pay it. It is a burden, they feel it, and many want to do their best to run away from it. But VAT is a consumption tax, so the potentials there are great. The tendency towards evading it is less, and the bureaucracy around it in terms of returns and all of that are highly minimized. So we want to increase our efforts in that area.
The National Tax Policy 2010 encourages a shift from direct to the indirect tax, a transactional kind of taxes seen as a good alternative, but has its challenges, like the VAT and withholding taxes, which comes through an agent who finds it difficult to remit to FIRS its own percentage. and puts it in his or her working capital. This and more are issues to be discussed tonight on Tuesday Live.
Funding the 2021 budget is the focus of the program tonight, and as usual, at some point our phone lines will be displayed on the screen, and if we're true to you, please turn down the volume of the television set to avoid the holdback in making your contributions. You can also be part of the conversation tonight through our Twitter handle at TuesdayLive NTA. In the course of the program also, we shall be bringing you reports dotting the landscape of the country. Today, we shall be doing almost about 8 reports coming from Lagos, Maiduguri, Port Harcourt, Enugu, Lafia, Asaba, Jos, and Jigawa states. Well, I'm being joined tonight in Abuja and Lagos by beginning with Professor Uche Owaleke. He's a professor of capital market and former commissioner of finance, Imo State. Welcome to Tuesday Live.
Thank you, Amini. My pleasure.
Also tonight we have Professor Abdullahi Danjuma Zubeiru, Professor of Accounting and Taxation, Nasarawa State University. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
From our Lagos Network Center, we have Ehile Adetola Aigbeni, tax and fiscal policy expert and non-executive board member, Federal Inland Revenue Service, admitted into the KPMG partnership in 2017. Welcome to the program. We have Albert Folorunsho, managing consultant, Pedabo Professional Services. Well, I hear the signal is not there for now. As soon as that is up, he's supposed to be joining us via Zoom, and as soon as it's up, we'll take him up. Now we begin the program. Professor Uche, let us make it simple. But the budget of recovery, but I hear Albert Folorunsho is up now, managing consultant, Pedabo Professional Services, business and tax advisory expert. He's joining us via Zoom in Lagos.
And thank you for having me.
The budget of recovery and resilience premised on the ravaging effect of COVID-19 is the 2021 budget. But for the very low there and people like us who are not the experts, funding the budget, what is it all about?
Thank you, Amini. Just before I get to that, let me quickly correct something that you said at the beginning.
Okay.
That the 2020 budget actually was initially based on $57 per barrel. But of course, you know, following the COVID-19 pandemic, it was revised. So that benchmark was revised downwards to $28 dollars per barrel. The other thing is that in 2021, the weight of the funding, okay, is on non-oil, not on oil. Because you find that the government, FGN's retained revenue in that, or FGN's budget is about 7.9 trillion. That's what they expect. The FGN share of the entire revenue that's going to be collected into the federation account, 7.9. And out of that, about 2 trillion is what is coming from the oil sector. So the rest is coming from the non-oil sector. So you find out that essentially 30% of the revenue is expected to come from oil, just 30%, and 70% from non-oil. So when you talk about funding, of course, a budget is a plan, okay? It's a plan that talks about projections of how much do you expect to get, and how much also do you expect to spend. Okay, if what you plan to spend is less than what you plan to get, okay, that means you have a budget surplus. But if what you plan to spend is higher than what you're projecting to get, there is a deficit. In the 2021 budget, the government expects to get, as I said, 7.9 trillion. The government plans to spend 13.5 trillion. So the size of the budget is 13.5. So we have a deficit of about 5.6 trillion. So when you have 5.6 trillion deficit, the question becomes, how do you finance the deficit? What do you do to plug that gap, that loophole? The government has said that they intend to borrow. The government says it intends to borrow 2.34 trillion from domestic sources, another 2.34 trillion, that's 50% from external sources. Okay, there will also be about 205 billion naira, from privatization proceeds, and another 700 billion from other sources. So that is the financing. The financing is largely going to be done by borrowing. But the issue of tax, where tax comes in, is to be able to reduce the deficit, because if we're able to collect more taxes, for example, okay, you now reduce the amount of money you'll be looking from outside, to finance the budget. So the deficit is reduced if the tax can be increased, if the non-oil revenue can be increased. Because just as you said in the opening, the oil revenue is something over which sometimes we have little or no control. Okay, oil price is not determined by us. Today we are fortunate, oil price is $60, and above. So there's every expectation that the revenue, oil revenue targets will be met, just as it was met in 2020. But the challenge has always been the non-oil, especially the tax. If you look at the 2020 budget, the performance by the one contained even in the 2021 budget, companies' income tax underperformed, value-added tax underperformed, custom duties, in terms of target. Okay. Now, unlike what we have in the case of oil revenue. So the challenge is, how do we ramp up this non-oil revenue? How do we ensure that they always meet target? And even if we're going to have any variance, it is going to be favorable variance. We exceed the target. I think that is where the challenge is.
Okay. Prof, going by what he said, what most times gets people worried, and the reason for this is to reorient the mindset of Nigerians to understand how all this works. Most times when we do programs like this, find people asking, with so much, why will government borrow? With so much, why will government borrow? So from his perspective, will you say it is realistic?
The budget per se,
yes,
as the government had actually projected. Well, to some extent, it's realistic, depending on the circumstances we find ourselves thereafter. Because if a budget will be naturally realistic, it means the sources of revenue or the sources of income must be explored apparently and to rhyme with the expenditure level so desired. But the issue he had just raised now is all along our tax revenue, to be specific, have not been meeting targets. And again, I want the public to also understand that all the realizations we make through taxes, through oil revenue, goes to the federation account, which is for onward distribution. Apparently, we all know that 52.68% of the revenue that goes to the federation account naturally goes to the federal government. Other distributions, the state and the local governments, and the revenue we're talking about, that is the budget we're talking about, is precisely that of the federal government, which is being controlled as consolidated revenue funds of the federal government. So realistically, I would say is tenable. The budget issue is tenable, but we need to do more, particularly from the tax angle, so that we can actually meet our targets. Otherwise, the way things are going, I mean, we may not be realistic with our budgets, because several years past, we have been having deficit budgets, which is not healthy for the economy. Because if we borrow, the financing and the issue of cost of borrowing is also there, which will constitute subsequent budget for the next year. And you have to finance the borrowings at all costs, because nobody would like to give you, because other countries are not Father Christmas. They will give you with an intent of realizing it with the relevant interest element therein. So in that perspective, except we wake up to do more and address more issues, otherwise we may not be realistic per se.
Okay, let's go to Lagos Network Center, where Ehile is joining us from. Okay, the Lagos Network Center signal is not up now. Let's go to the man on Zoom, the managing consultant, Pedabo Professionals, Albert Folorunsho. If you hear me clearly, we did an analysis of the Finance Act 2020, and we had so much reductions and holidays given to a number of issues, including even VAT. And the question we asked then, if funding the budget from the analysis of Professor Waleke and Professor Zubeiru here, what would we do have issues of reduction now? So,
you know, we are in a period of pandemic, and a lot of companies struggled all through 2020, and so there is need for those incentives so that those companies can come back to work. Those are tax expenditure issues. The level of compliance is improved. Definitely, those incentives will drastically supposed to be reduced. If you look at our total revenue projection, which is about 7.9 billion, out of which non-oil, like we said, is supposed to be 1.4 trillion, and then of course other sources trillion, 34%. But if you compare the total even revenue projection with what the South Africa collected in 2020 on personal income tax alone, if you convert it to Naira, it's about 11.85 trillion, okay, which we need to do a lot more. And of course, we can see that the Federal Revenue Service has a lot of work to do to be able to meet up. But that does not mean that those incentives are out of place. For example, there are complaints around the reduction in custom duty and levy. Of course, we expect that is not patronage of the Nigerian ports. Again, if you look at the reduction, the exemption of minimum wage from tax, if you look at the total tax exposure and why states have really not complained, is the fact that up to only 20% of the taxable individual, the remaining low-income earners contribute not near to nothing to the revenue being collected by those states, and that is why you have not seen any complaint from there. Again, if you look at the tax holiday being granted to agric companies, particularly those in the medium and small scale, it is to stimulate the agricultural industry and the primary Nigerians. Those are also very critical, even though we want to ramp up revenue, and we believe that from the projection, the tax authorities are already having pointers that shows that they'll be able to meet the budget, particularly if you look at the automation that has been provided for in the Finance Act, and we believe that if they are supported to be able to there is an increase to some extent or a special support. You know, I don't believe that they can, with the 11,000 employees that they have now and their expenditure, I don't believe that they will have enough balance to be able to fund the technology that is required to stimulate revenue generation. Maybe there will be a special display, I believe, are critical for government to be able to meet the revenue projection.
So much, Folorunso. Let's go to Ehile. Ehile, well, you heard from Folorunso that the Federal Revenue Service has a lot to do, a lot of work to do to shore up funding the budget. And just rising from the National Tax Dialogue organized by the Federal Revenue Service, and having a chat with the Executive Chairman of the Federal Revenue Service a couple of weeks ago, he churned out a couple of steps that the Federal Revenue Service is putting in place to ensure that we have it a lot easier than maybe the previous years. So where are we heading?
Much, Omini. I think it's very clear where we're heading, you know, as Federal Inland Revenue Service. And one critical thing that you will hear us say all the time is that we want a data-centric organization. And that's why we're very grateful for what has happened to us via the 2020 Finance Act. That has enabled us, have the much needed regulatory framework that we need to adopt technology. There's something about technology, right? And particularly in climes like ours. One of the biggest challenge FRS has been having over the years before is that they were unable to embed some aspects of technology into their work. So you have other countries like, all around the world where you do a transaction and immediately the government gets credited for the VAT or for the sales tax. It wasn't like that in Nigeria. We had an instance where sometimes we had to wait 21 days, because our law mandates that we wait 21 days. And in accordance with your documentary, what that then means is that the person that deducted that tax has 21 days to use that money as working capital. So if he doesn't remit that money within, any longer, or he doesn't have that money available to him, he's unable to remit it. But with what has been done for us with the 2020 Finance Act, we can embed technology into our process, because as you then buy your goods and services, things like VAT can automatically be, paid into the Federal Inland Revenue Services account. That's one. Secondly, so we've crossed the hurdle of, having it entrenched in our law. The second and the most important thing for us to then do now is embed it throughout all our processes. And one of the critical things that we're working on critically, and there is board support, there's management support, and also even our principal support for this, we're very grateful to the minister, is that we would embed technology from end to end, whether it's in identification of the taxpayer, and and as a service currently, we have a lot of silo system. So what this would do for us is we're going to be integrating our systems in terms of identifying who the right taxpayer is. We're going to be embedding it in our administration process, so it's easy for us to administer the taxes on the taxpayer. If you look at some of the things we're doing, you don't need to come to our offices. In collection, it would also be clear that we can collect from anywhere from the click of a button, and then even embed it in our dispute resolution process as well. So whether it's in our audit process, which will be risk-based, whether it's looking in through, whether you have a refund. So from end to end, the aim is going to be using technology, using the data that we have available to us, to ensure that we have a more nimble system, we have a more efficient system, the cost for collection is more lower, and then people can voluntarily comply, because once that is available, it's more easier for taxpayers to voluntarily comply. Fraud is less, because you don't need to come to the offices to do any of your transaction. You can sit in your office, you can sit in your car, in your homes, and offer your transaction. I think that's one of the things that, the organization is planning to do. And so it's looking at it totally. And as a country, I think one thing that is critical as well is also to embed it, across, so beyond the federal, is also to look at the subnationals and make sure that technology is also embedded in their process, because you can, like the professor was talking earlier on, what we're debating is the federal budget, but the state budgets are much, by the time you add up all the 36 states, their budget and their needs will be much bigger than the federal budget. So I think it's all ensuring that that process also goes down, to the subnationals. Thank you.
Chief, I believe we have a direction now. Now, she has come up with a couple of issues. Now, Nigeria being a federation, exclusive lists, concurrent lists, residual lists. Now, if going by what the innovation that the Federal Revenue Service is coming up with, if there's no synergy across board, will it work?
I don't think it's going to work. And that's because one of the major challenges we are facing in our tax system today has to do with multiplicity of taxes. Where you have several agencies of government, cutting across, collecting taxes that are similar. Okay, of course, that's a great disincentive, and that is why there is need for proper coordination, between all the levels of government, maybe championed at the level of the, joint tax board. I recall that we have a list of approved taxes, to be collected at different levels. But of course, you find that most of the time the observance is more in the breach. Okay, I was also going to say something, in relation to the challenges and how to ramp up, the tax revenue. There is a study by OECD, that says that developing countries typically have a tax to GDP ratio of 15%, typically. And for developed economies, it is between 30 to 40%. Okay. So what that means is that for us in Nigeria, with tax to GDP ratio of just 6%, we are even below the average for developing countries. And if you look at the success stories of some countries, what they did to ramp up the tax to GDP ratio, okay, what you find is that they center their reforms around three key things. One is on the tax base, trying to broaden the tax base. The other is on the tax mix, getting an appropriate mix, an optimal mix for the tax regime, and the other is the tax burden. Now, with respect to tax base, what countries have done, a country that readily comes to my mind is Georgia, is to, of course, try to broaden the tax base, which, again, Nigeria, we're also trying to do. If you look at the Finance Act of 2019, okay, the Finance Act of 2019, one of the things it said there in Section 3 of the Finance Act of 2019 is to require all companies, okay, to have a TIN, tax identification number, before any account can be operated. The same for individuals. So that way, the tax base, a lot more people are brought into the tax net. Another way to broaden tax base is to formalize the informal sector, because a lot of leakages go on there. Taxes cannot be collected from them. Now, the other issue has to do with the tax mix. All these issues, happily, are also contained in the National Tax Policy 2017. In the National Tax Policy, there's more emphasis on indirect taxes, especially on the value-added tax, because indirect taxes are easier to collect. They are also more difficult to evade. So more emphasis is on VAT. So that is what these other countries have done. The other, which is also tied to the mix, is the tax burden. These countries too, Georgia, for example, reduced the tax rate. You reduce tax rates and expand the tax base. Okay. The IMF only yesterday, is recommending that Nigeria should consider increasing the value-added tax from 7.5% this year to 10% by 2022.
What happens?
No. By 2022. Okay. So, every year the budget comes with a Finance Act. In other words, the Finance Act that will accompany the 2022 budget should provide for an increase in the VAT to 10%. Okay, but that did not also say, and that is where I fault it, it did not also say that companies' income tax, for example, should be reduced. Because we have a company's income tax today of 30%. Even though the Finance Act of also 2019, introduced graduated rates. Today we also have 20% for companies with turnover of 25 million and 100 million. So the point I'm making is this: we need to reduce the direct taxes, reduce companies' income tax, and increase. If we are increasing VAT, then that has to be because we're also reducing companies' income tax. Okay. And the idea of having graduated rates for companies' income tax, in my view, may not really be productive, in the sense that it may not lead to a higher tax yield. This is because it is not as simple as it appears. What appears simple is to have a flat rate. If we drop our companies' income tax today to, say, 25%, which is the rate in Ghana, Ghana's companies' income tax is 25%, because if you are an investor and you're thinking of which country to go and put your company on the basis of tax alone, you would choose Ghana as opposed to Nigeria, because tax in Ghana is 25, in Nigeria is 30. So we drop our own to 25 to be competitive, okay, while you are increasing the value-added tax. Okay. Then the other one is the issue of incentives. Incentives on the part of those who are even collecting this tax. And that is why I think strongly that the 4% that the FIRS has been collecting over the years, should be increased. Okay, there was a time there was this issue of increasing it to 7%. Okay. That is what I think should happen. We should increase it to even enable the FIRS to invest in this automation we're talking about, because automation is critical if you have to, ramp up, tax.
Okay, let's look at that perspective.
Yes.
Prof, let's go to borrowing to fund the budget, besides taxation now. Because each time the layman on the streets, the critics who have not bothered to find out the parameters involved, here government is borrowing. Why would they borrow? Why would they borrow? So can we elucidate on this? Borrowing to fund the budget. How economical? What informs it? Is it that government just wakes up to borrow to fund the budget?
Apparently, what we should look at now is precisely what is the objective of the government. Is to provide services to the people. If the government sees that the people are desirous of so activities, and it's inevitable for them to actually run it off, they will need, or they will have to get ways and means of providing such services. And if they don't have the means of getting the money around them to do this service, and it's enormous that these services must come, what do? They have to go borrowing. And when they go borrowing, it is increasing the cost of governance, because we pay interest from the borrowed funds we have, particularly when they are external borrowings. Now, let me just give you one illustration. There is a project that had just been completed. It's a bridge, local Oweto bridge, in recent time. Anybody moving from Abuja or from the northern part of the country down to the east shortens his journey by about 3 hours, which is very good for the economy. And if you leave Abuja within no distant time, you are already in Enugu. And from the eastern part, you can move commodities, and from the northern part, you can also move. So it has become necessary for the government to establish such bridge. And if that comes, it goes well for the economy. But how do they bring it? Through the borrowing process. Now, my colleagues have been talking about tax. You see, it is, in fact, our tax system is in a confused state. Sorry to say it. Now, just like he had just exemplified with the company's income tax, now the company's income tax is now progressive. In fact, to the extent that if a company is having a turnover of 25 million, is at 0%. And between 25 to 100 million is 20%. And anything in excess of 100 million is 30%. And how do you find out that? If you even go to our VAT, it's another problem. There's a threshold that all companies that earn less than 25 million and below are not supposed to be registered for VAT. And I tend to get confused. Who is paying the VAT? Is it the company that's paying the VAT, or it is the consumers that are paying VAT? So if you like the private person from now rendering his returns, bringing his, collecting VAT, then that goes off, and it's not coming to the coffers of the government anymore. Then are we reducing our sources of income, or we're increasing it? The problem we're having in this country, as far as taxation is concerned, is that we don't have data. Because I think if we go back to the time of former Minister for Finance.
But the lady from Lagos has talked about that. The good thing is that with the Finance Act in place now, the entire system is data-centric.
But you see, the data is not yet boosted for everyone to be convinced that the issues are there. It's just commencing. And I know, you see, even with the previous chairman of FRS, we just move around from small fall to a particular position. We have not even passed the level of 5 trillion in any year for their collection. Why? The records we have, far back as 2012, is still the same record that is happening. Is it that the economy is stagnated, or activities are not going on, or what? It's all coming from the content of the tax laws. We said the law is on us. The deal for us to make these collections is now individualized, and the revenue board must have to do the much they are supposed to do to get this on board.
Okay.
You look at now, let me just give you some instances. If you go to Section 37 of the Personal Income Tax Act, which talks about minimum tax, they said minimum wage workers are now exempted from paying of minimum tax. And who is the minimum wage person?
What's the difference between that and the income tax? Is it the same thing?
Pardon?
The minimum wage tax and income tax. Are they the same thing?
Just personal income tax is all under personal income tax. Okay. Apparently, if you know, globally we have only two brackets of taxpayers. It's either it's a company or it's an individual. So in this passage, we are talking about an individual who is earning a minimum wage employee. The federal government is saying that her minimum wage is 30,000 naira. The law had come with complications because 30,000 naira, is it a threshold that anybody earning 30,000 naira is not going to pay tax? Now, somebody paying collecting 31,000, what will be his status? Is it that the only 1,000 remaining that will not be taxed, or is that 1,000 that will not be fully taxed? Okay. These are all ambiguities that need to be cleared even within the content of the law. Let me tell you, 2011 we had amendment in the Personal Income Tax Act that now created consolidated relief and allowances. Are we together? Yeah. Now, these relief and allowances are supposed to take care of all these children allowance, dependent relatives allowance, but then even with that, those things were still remaining in the law. Not until 2019 that they are now being expunged from the law. So it created confusion. It has been confusion all along. So I think we need to sit down and get matters straight and allow the taxpayer not to be confused. And because the taxpayer is confused, and again we have problem in this country, seriously, that we need to actually know where these taxes are supposed to go and what they are being meant for. The collections, are we sure they are being utilized in the absolute sense? If you go to Lagos, for instance, record has it that all taxpayers in Lagos, they go to the door of the tax authority to say, how much is my tax liability? You know why? They are seeing it on the ground. If you see taxpayers' money, let it be for a taxpayer to identify that his money is being used for his own purposes. Okay. If that is not being done, at least, like we said, even though we agree that there is no quid pro quo in tax matters, that is to say you don't expect sufficient benefits for what you have paid, but however, let us see it on the ground.
Okay, Prof. Let's go to Ehile. Ehile, for what Professor Zubero is saying here, it looks as though he has raised like 4 questions I would have asked you already. I'm sure you want to respond.
Thank you, Mini. And I will talk to the issue of a minimum-based tax. I mean, it's not peculiar to our climes. Most developing and even developed countries have a minimum threshold, whether be it for individuals or be it for companies. If you look at just Ghana, the minimum threshold for individuals in Ghana is almost 600,000 if you convert it into Nigerian currency. Ours is just 30,000. And what is the trust behind it? What the PNB administration is basically saying is that I know that the issue with us is we want to lift people out of poverty. And one of the best way to do that is to reduce the burden on them from a direct tax perspective. And even when you even look at these direct taxes in the first place, we can't even collect it from them because the cost of collection from these categories of people are very high. And the aim is when you give them that money, when that money is available to them, they then spend more. As they spend more, you get more in indirect taxes, whether via VAT or via customs or whatever it is, they spend more on. Okay, so the aim is to say, reduce the burden of direct taxes on the lower end so that they can have more disposable income to spend more. If I look at the company's income tax, for example, I mean, what the law has said, what the 2019 Finance Act has said is that every company, you're meant to register. So the issue is not registration, you don't register until you become 25 million. No, you will still register. but that allows, whether it's the FRS to collect data, so we know your existence. Because if we had looked at the data, so it wasn't just done without data. So exempting 25 million, whether from filing VAT returns or paying companies income tax, was not just done out of lack of data. Data supported the fact that, the cost of even collecting the taxes from this set of human beings is much higher than the taxes that we're asking them to pay. So that was the basis that formed the decision on exempting that base from VAT. And if I then come back to it, there was a countermeasure that was put in the bill, in the act. If you look at it, if you are then a company that is dealing with such a small business, you should self-charge. So at the end of the day, the VAT sometimes isn't lost, because the bigger businesses that we can easily go after, that we can easily ask questions from as a country, are meant to self-charge, because they are the ones enjoying the services from the small businesses or from the small companies. But when those small businesses sell to you and I on the street, because the conversation is to make sure that we continue to spend, they don't charge us VAT. And that feeds back to the conversation of, we need to reboot the economy. We need to make sure we get the economy spending and alive again. The other issue I wanted to then talk about, was with respect to, the tax mix that the professor also mentioned. The truth is, there is no one cap fits all when it comes to the right tax mix. If you look at also the conversation in Nigeria, people will tell you, oh, the rich people should pay direct taxes, but that hasn't worked very well for us as a country. So it's about getting the right mix. What works for what country? What works in your jurisdiction? And sometimes it may also be what works in your state. Because you may have some states, for example, some states have said to themselves, we want to do a consumption tax levy. So if you enjoy certain types of services or certain types of goods, you pay consumption tax, which is a form of indirect tax. Other states have said, I'll go the economic levy route, which is, as long as you are in my state, you pay me some type of economic levy, which is some sort of direct taxes. So it's a mix that will work for any country. You can't rely on one type. So there is no one type fits all at all. Thank you.
Following Shop, to you now, sorry we lost your signals initially. With all this, when you talk about funding the tax, funding the budget, I beg your pardon, the worry is, as much as the parameters are in place, the indices are in place, the good intentions are in place, if the people don't have a workable or implementable tax culture, will we head anywhere? From that, we are having signature. Let me just bring that question here.
A tax culture, if I understood you,
let me just reiterate. For instance,
yes,
all what we have discussed so far.
Yes.
Professor Zuberi talked about in Lagos, for instance,
yes,
where people, because they have seen how the tax is
yes, that's voluntary compliance.
Go knocking.
Exactly.
Say, I want to pay tax.
Yes.
So.
But he also gave the reason. It's a function of
yes.
Trust. The people's trust in government. So it's a function of the social contract, between the people and the government. Once the people are satisfied that the government, the taxes they are paying, are being utilized, of course they will voluntarily comply. The other thing too also has to do with what I mentioned earlier, the tax burden. The tax burden, one of the principles of taxation is a tolerable tax burden. So the tax system generally should not be such that will impose heavy burden or incidents on the taxpayer. So when the taxes are small, people can pay those taxes effortlessly. So that is also why when you also find people voluntarily complying. There's one other issue I want to mention here, which resonated prominently at the National Tax Dialogue that held the other day. I was at that dialogue, and it was clear that there is need to revisit the raft of waivers, and exemptions, because that's also borrowing a hole in the nation's coffers. Now, if you look at even the 2021 to 23 medium-term expenditure framework / fiscal strategy paper, you will find that the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning also accompanied that with a tax expenditure statement. A tax expenditure statement, provides dimensions of the cost of these waivers. Okay, and in that tax expenditure statement, it says that for VAT alone, the government, loses or stands to lose, within this period of time, over 3 trillion naira, from exemptions. For companies' income tax, about 1.18 trillion. We are losing. So there is need to revisit these exemptions, and that's also what you find in other climes, so that they don't become, ineffective. Okay. So on the issue of borrowing, let me also weigh in a little bit.
Borrowing to fund.
Yes, borrowing to fund. Yes,
whether external or
no, those can be justified, especially if the funding is going to to infrastructure. If the funding is for self-liquidated, projects. Okay, so you can justify it. And as a matter of fact, there was a webinar we had this morning in which I made a presentation, and I said that you can use your taxes. You can target to use your taxes at least to cover your recurrent expenditure. Recurrent expenditure in 2021 budget is about 5.6 trillion. 2021 budget. Okay, so it should be such that we generate enough taxes, domestic IGR, to at least take that off. So the capital part of it now, okay, you can now say you want to borrow and fund, and part of that borrowing, as I said, has to be through the capital market. You go to the capital market, for example, you issue revenue bonds, not just general obligation bonds, revenue bonds, infrastructure bonds, project-tied bonds. So the bonds that the proceeds will be used to fund particular projects that will generate revenue, and the revenue from those projects will be what you use to, service that liquidated debt.
Okay, but let me hold you there. Let's go to Funirunshwa. We hear his signal is up now before we take our first set of reports. Funirunshwa, let me parry the question differently now. I was worried about if you can hear me, the besides revenue generation through taxes, various categories of taxation to fund the budget. I was worried about borrowing to fund the budget, and I said this because most often people don't want to know what informed the rationale behind the borrowing. Why are they borrowing to fund the budget? With all the revenue government is getting, if they hear maybe Federal Revenue Service declaring so much, why would they borrow to fund the budget? What's your perspective? Seems we are still having challenges with the Funirunshwa signals. Well, okay, you can conclude.
Yes, the other issue also has to do with target setting the right targets for this revenue collection agencies. If you look at the 2021 budget, for example.
But why don't we just do it? Let me just hold it there. When we come back from the reports,
yes,
we look at target setting, because that's a component we want to look at here. And also the issue of timelines and deliverables.
Yes.
So we have a couple of reports, about 8, but let's take the first 4. And the first one beginning with the report from Lagos.
Okay, yes.
Targeting.
Yes, target setting. The target should be realistic. If you look at the 2021 budget, I place it side by side with the 2020 budget. Now you realize that the projection for 2020 with respect to companies' income tax in 2020 was 864 billion. That for 2021, now fell to a little above 600 billion. For value-added tax, we had 284. For 2021, when you should expect that the projection should increase, because in 2020, don't forget, the economy was in a recession. In 2020, we had COVID. Okay, 2021, there's expectation that the economy will, turn the corner. And remember too, the 2021 budget is based on the GDP growth of 3%. So government actually expects that the economy will grow in 2021. Consumption level in 2021 is higher, but the projection than in 2020. So what that means is that what you expect to get from VAT, okay, even if you maintain the same collection efficiency, what you should get from VAT should be higher than that for 2020. But that's not the case. We are having a lower figure. Companies' income tax, again, if the economy is stronger in 2021 than in 2020, the performance from CIT should also be higher. So you see those projections lower. So that got me worried. And when you see that kind of thing in the budget, in theory, we call such things budgetary slack, on the part of revenue. So why would you want to lower those targets? Okay, so going forward, it's important we set these realistic targets. Okay, because if we had set a realistic target with respect to CIT and VAT and possibly customs, the deficit we are having of over 5 trillion. Yeah. Okay. Yes, will drop. Okay, and that would even motivate, ginger the FIRS, ginger the customs, to bring in more money, because they're looking at a higher target. If the target is so low, it demotivates. Okay. And that's why I talked about incentives even to the FIRS, itself. FIRS needs more staff. There's no doubt about that. If they must do monitoring, because monitoring, if you look at countries that have succeeded in ramping up their taxes, enforcement is key. Even when you automate and you don't enforce, the money doesn't come in. So for you to enforce, for you to monitor, okay, you need hands, you need staff, trained staff. And that's why I was talking about, increasing possibly from the 4% to 7%. To make sure they're in a position to do that.
I know Professor Zuberi is itching to speak, but let's take some reports, and I will hear the reports already now. Let's begin with the one from Lagos.
Of the current realities as regards COVID-19 pandemic and volatility in oil price at the international markets, most economies of the world had a readjustment to their financial spending in order not to operate on more deficits in their budgets. Nigeria, as an economy that mostly relies on oil as its major source of revenue generation for the implementation of capital and recurrent expenditure, had its 2021 budget reviewed to accommodate economic realities. In this regard, the federal government, towards ensuring a paradigm shift from a low revenue performing budget to a more responsive financial estimate, resting its shoulders on internally generated revenue, reviewed some tax policies and charged relevant agencies to be more proactive in the execution for more earnings. With a budget estimate of 13.08 trillion naira and an expected revenue of 7.89 trillion naira, what measures have been put in place by these agencies to meet up despite the new normal?
We use our enforcement tools too. All our debts that were almost even written off, we had to go persuading taxpayers. Persuasions were done, and taxpayers, they yielded to our begging and pleading, and that actually brought about a lot of revenue collection.
And so we were poised for a full year implementation, the budget on January, which was something that we hadn't done for a long while. This proves that the delayed passage of the budget was a contributory factor to the inadequate implementation of previous years.
With an improved system of tax payments introduced by FIRS, including automation process, e-filing, and decentralization of auditing system, as well as the electronic payment system adopted by most of the agencies, experts agreed that more taxpayers will be brought into the tax nets, thereby growing the nation's revenue base. While all efforts are being intensified to widen Nigeria's tax net to boost the federal government's source of revenue generation, an appeal for a sustained, transparent implementation process was also advocated.
Our next report from Maiduguri begins with the fact that despite the lingering security challenges, Borno State government has adopted new financial policies for economic recovery and sources for improved internal generated revenue to support funding of the budget. Among strategies is a single treasury account to block leakages and raise IGR to fund the 2021 budget amidst the decadence caused by the Boko Haram insurgency. To report.
For over a decade, Borno State suffered huge losses from commercial activities due to the insurgency which ravaged socio-economic foundations of many revenue-generating communities and businesses, of goods and people engaged in various transactions. Records from Borno State Inland Revenue Service reveals that once thriving commercial hubs which sourced revenue to all tiers of government, such as Bama, Mongono, Mobar and Ngala, are now closed in northern Borno, reducing income to the state.
For business to thrive, you need enough capital, you need security, you need good road, you need human resources, so that the business will definitely continue. And if the business continues, people will not shy away from paying their levies, paying their taxes, and in that way, government will definitely generate revenue that will help in government in discharging its obligations.
Looking inwards, government adopted measures to improve IGR and block leakages of existing sources of income from NDAs, boards and parastatals to include automation of payment of taxes and levies, cashless policies, as well as single treasury account.
Close to 10 months of this year, we have generated more than 400% of what was generated last year due to this step that was taken by government. So it's greatly an improvement, and it is same with almost all organizations within the state.
The government also explored other additional channels of income under Traffic Management Agency, ground rents and transaction taxes on sales of property, among others, which officials say has increased the feasibility of funding the 2021 budget through IGR.
With this Traffic Management Agency alone, we were able to at least come up with a source which will yield nothing less than 2 to 2-point-something billion per annum to the state.
The total expected IGR from NDS for 2020 is estimated at over 17 billion naira, while those from boards and parastatal is 790 million naira, and estimated revenue for next year is expected to be even more.
And from Port Harcourt, over 13 trillion naira is the approved 2021 budget by President Muhammadu Buhari. Actualizing the funding is no doubt a huge task for revenue generation authorities. How do these authorities intend to live up to the expectation?
The over 13 trillion naira earmarked expenditure for the 2021 fiscal year, tagged Budget of Economic Recovery and Resilience, the Federal Inland Revenue Service is expected to generate about 7.9 trillion naira. Tax Controller, Large Taxpayers Office, Port Harcourt, Amisu Mohammed Ibrahim says, aside from the 2020 Finance Act, which has helped to review Nigeria's tax law, thereby eliciting more compliance from the citizenry, massive adoption of ICT, opening of multiple tax offices, as well as consistent taxpayers' education and engagement fora are some measures adopted by the service. Effective domestication of these measures across the tax offices in Rivers, Edo and Delta is playing a huge role in repositioning them for better service delivery.
From the beginning of this year, we've already put measures in place on how to achieve the revenue target given to my office, because we know our major taxpayers, which is key. By the time we know how they are performing and how the year is also appearing to them, we'll go to sleep, because I can't be concerned about my own collection in isolation of them. But the determination we have and the proactive nature we've introduced is what is really giving us that full confidence that we are going to not only meet the target of 2021, we are going to surpass it.
Complementing the Federal Inland Revenue Service each year, other key revenue sources like the Nigeria Customs, Immigration, and the Nigerian Ports Authority, to mention a few, also add to the revenue.
It's welcoming because in the comfort of your office, in the comfort of your home, you can actually make your returns, you can actually pay and then get your receipt.
By and large, with continuous improvement in the mechanism being employed against the prevailing challenges, revenue generation is expected to witness steady rise, thereby easing the burden of raising enough funds to meet the needs of the people.
Our next stop is Enugu, and it says from Enugu comes a report that the level of citizens' compliance with tax regulation is in the southeast, Ebonyi, Abia, and Enugu states is said to be encouraging. Let's take a listen to the report.
Is the lifeblood of any government, and one of the benefits of paying taxes is funding the government in meeting its revenue benchmark for budgets. This will also help the government fund its projects for economic development with a united effort of citizens in compliance.
And we also pay our tax yearly. Like this year, I've done that, so we comply.
And the level of citizens' compliance with tax regulation in the southeast, Ebonyi, Abia, and Enugu states precisely, is said to be encouraging as at 2020. Change in management also affected the level of compliance positively in spite of the global health challenge.
We were able to achieve over 70% of our target in terms of compliance. We are expecting that for this year, there definitely will be better.
About 3,000 active taxpayers in Abia, Ebonyi, and Enugu State are expected to file return regularly, while more payers are inactive owing to challenges with borders on dormancy in business after years of operation, which also affect level of compliance in this zone. Company income tax, value-added tax, withholding tax, capital gain and stamp duty tax, among others, a good number of taxes payable by businessmen and women in Nigeria. It is, however, clear that if these eligible taxpayers comply regularly, the contribution will no doubt help the government in meeting revenue benchmark for budget funding for the benefit of all.
And that's the last for this segment. Before then, when we come back, we shall be looking at how really best can we fund through taxation, fund through borrowing, and people get to see the dividend just after this time out. Stay with us.
For now, the best and most efficient way to avoid getting infected is through regular hygienic and sanitary practices, as well as social distancing. As individuals, we remain the greatest weapon to fight this pandemic. By washing our hands regularly with clean water and soap, disinfecting frequently used surfaces and areas, coughing into a tissue or elbow, and strictly adhering to infection prevention control measures in health facilities, we can contain this virus.
The Small and Medium Enterprises Development Agency of Nigeria is here to help you succeed. SMEDAN gives you entrepreneurship training that will make your business grow big. It can create access to finance. SMEDAN can help you prepare a good feasibility study and link you up with the finance institutions that will fund your business. It can also create access to market through local and international trade fairs, opportunity fairs, and exhibitions. SMEDAN also organizes programs to identify innovative entrepreneurs and promote their business ideas. Contact us at Plot 35, Port Harcourt Crescent, Area 11, Garki, Abuja, or visit our website www.smedan.gov.ng.
Nigerian youths are about the greatest assets the country has at the moment. It is therefore not surprising that the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari is strategically responding to the yearnings of the youth through of Industry, the Youth Investment Fund by the CBN, and several other conditional cash transfer programs. Recruitment of 774,000 social workers, majority of whom are youths, and so many other projects that are beneficial to youths directly or indirectly. If the administration can do all this, definitely with a degree of patience and time, it can achieve more. Nigerian youths must come together to say no to terrorism, no to vandalism, and no to all disruptive tendencies. Hashtag Youth for Greater Nigeria, pacifying the youths, unifying the nation.
Coronavirus is real. Steps to avoid this pandemic. Wash your hands regularly or sanitize your hands. Keep social and physical distancing. Avoid crowded places. Stay at home unless absolutely necessary. Don't touch your eyes, nose, or mouth if your hands are not clean. Avoid the spread of coronavirus. Coronavirus is real.
NTA Tuesday Live, a network issue-oriented innovation talk show.
Thanks for staying tuned, and tonight we are looking at funding the 2021 budget. I hear Albert Folorusha is up now. We hope the signals are better this time around. Albert, if you can hear me, ultimately, if you look at it, funding the budget, you can't look the right way, but you must look at taxation. And the question we ask is, what new innovations besides the Finance Act, which has given them some backing to do a couple of things, what new innovations can you suggest besides the Finance Act on funding the budget?
Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully you are hearing me now. So the budget can only be funded from internally generated revenue and of course from borrowing, and that is what all other countries does. And so for us to be able to fund the budget, we have looked at the expected internally generated revenue that is expected from the Federal Revenue Service and all the other revenue generating agencies. And so what government can do specifically to ensure that the expected revenue can be achieved is to start from the top. And when I mean from the top, government agencies are also agents of government for collection of withholding tax, for also collection of VAT. Okay, if those taxes are remitted, promptly and quickly by these government agencies, it will go a long way in ensuring that the revenue can be generated and harnessed. Two, we also have, of course, the high net worth individuals. This is not only about by the federal, or the subnational too need to be able to fund their budget, and so we expect the high net worth individuals to have that culture of compliance with their taxes. We also have huge taxes that are hanging there, here and there in the informal sector, particularly the market people. Some of those areas that we call informal sector, there are real formal sector within them. So government need to penetrate the informal sector to ensure that they are brought into the tax net, to ensure that those informal sectors are also pay some form of tax. Again, we have long list of taxes and levies that are collectible. I hope that in the very near future, all those taxes can be harmonized so that we have reduced list of taxes that Nigerians are made to pay. Okay, and of course, I know it's tough now because of the federal system, but of course, it is also good to have one tax authority. And we have seen in several other countries where they have
one tax authority like the HMRC in UK, the SARS in South Africa, the quantum of revenue that have been generated, which is very cost effective, can also not be compared with what we have in Nigeria, where you have the Federal Revenue Service and all the state tax authorities. Hopefully, one day we'll be able to get there. Then if you look at the FRS, a lot needs to be done in terms of being able to generate the revenue. The employees, like I mentioned, about 11,000, okay, cannot collect revenue that is required for over 200 million Nigerians. And so that area has to be looked at. Again, the funding, they are going into automation and deployment of technology here and there. They need a lot of funding. I don't believe it's something that can be achieved this year. It is just the starting point for me. And so they need to do a lot of internal, deployment of technology for them to be able to, access the taxpayers' system, for them to be able to generate those revenues. So therefore, I believe that a lot of funding will be required. If you look at other countries, the effective collection percentage rate is about 1%, or even less than 1%. But here we have 4%. But 4% of what? The total revenue generation for last year was 4.9 trillion. So 4% is low compared to the revenue, but they also need to show up that revenue. And to be able to show up that revenue, they may need a temporary period of increase so that they can deploy those additional increase into the technology. And as soon as those technology becomes efficient and effective and running, then of course that will bring down the collection rate even below 4%. But for now, I think there is a need for government to deliberately budget for FRS to be able to deploy those technology that are required. I've also talked about, somebody also mentioned the issue around minimum tax, and why do we have minimum tax? Why do we exempt some companies from paying tax? You cannot, with the number of employees we have managing the tax authorities, they cannot harness, they cannot, assess tax from all Nigerians, and that is why for those below 25 million, it is just a distraction to the tax authority if you look at the profile of the collection, where not more than 20% of the taxpaying public are the one paying more than 80% of the revenue generated. So why do you want to waste so much of the limited fund that is available now on the remaining 20% that almost insignificant? And so that justifies the reduction, the exemption of minimum wage earners, the exemption of those with 25 million turnover, and so on. And like Madam Aditola mentioned, the fact that those companies are not expected to file VAT returns does not mean that their VAT are being lost. And it is not even compulsory. If you think you are into a genuine business, and for you to be able to claim your input VAT from the VAT you are charging on your output, definitely you can go ahead and register, and the tax authority will definitely register you so that you can make claim for your input VAT out of your output VAT. But other than that, again, there are some that are also engaged with government. It is compulsory. You cannot be dealing with government and not register for VAT. You will not be able to do those transactions. These are areas I believe that we need to be looking at, look at in the future. And there are some other taxes that are not already performing the way they should. Again, which means that they need some review. The stamp duty is a major one, okay? And the existing law is the 1939 law. And so there's a need for a holistic review of that law. The capital gains is also underperforming, okay? And of course, we understand the new provision in the Finance Act now that allows returns to be filed twice so that the tax on the gains can immediately be paid. But a lot of things in the CGT Act also need some level of review. And all of these are things that can be done so that we'll be able to show up our tax to GDP ratio, which is a percentage which is currently at 6%, which is far below what we have in other countries. In Sweden, the tax rate, effective rate is about 78%. In Norway, it's about 68%. And so here we are having so much, the tax rate here is so low. But of course, we can also not shy away from the fact that the public need to have the enjoyment of the tax revenue. to be able to have that desire to pay. You cannot pay tax and again look for money to drill borehole here and there. You cannot pay tax and then your cars are getting destroyed by pothole here and there. Those are things that Nigerians will also need, so that the culture that we desire, such that people will willingly pay their taxes, can be imbibed in most companies and most Nigerians. Thank you very much.
Before I come to Professor Zubairu and Ehile, quickly, one other problem that will affect funding the budget could be the evasion of tax.
Go ahead with the question. Tax evasion, of course, is where there is a deliberate attempt not to pay tax. Okay, and that could happen through failure to file your returns, failure to disclose your income, failure to, desire to overstate your costs and all that. But these tax evasion is criminal, and that must not be compared with tax avoidance, which is taking advantage of the loopholes in the tax law. And with the way the tax law is going now, where on a yearly basis the Finance Act is looking at areas that have created loopholes for taxpayers and blocking those those holes, there will be little or nothing advantage to be taken of the tax law. But tax evasion is definitely going to continue in a country where the infrastructure is not there. Okay, and of course that desire to pay is a major problem. And so, but of course, a lot can be done by FRS, and that will be reduced if there is automation. Two, there is enforcement. You cannot shy away from enforcement even where you have automation. There has to be enforcement one way or the other. And that enforcement must also go through the proper channel, okay, so that you don't just go to companies and start locking them up. The proper channel must be followed. Okay, you must have raised an assessment. There must have been an objection. You must have gone through the court. The assessment must have become final and conclusive. And of course, the tax authority is at no other option than to, swap on the company. These are things that must be done to stamp out tax evasion. And I can see that if truly the tax law continue to mature the way it is maturing, and is being amended and updated on a regular basis, in the very near future, I'm sure we'll be able to be proud of also talking about a 15% tax to GDP ratio for Nigeria.
Let's go to Ehile. Ehile, you have heard so much about automation, technology, and about what are the safeguards in place? Because as much as you have all these, people still have a way they cut corners. Now, technology, good. Technology without enforcement, will it work? And what safeguards are in place to ensure that people don't cut corners? Because I could be as smart and still cut corners despite the fact that there's technology in place.
Thank you so much. And I think an amazing question. But before I come to that question, one of the things I wanted to just say, with respect to funding the budget, was the other things that are being done beyond taxation. Okay, because we had talked earlier about borrowing, we had talked earlier about internal, whether it's from other MDAs or the tax authorities. But one critical thing as well, it's also the efficiency and the way government runs. And one of the two things that has been done with the Finance Act for 2020 is to ensure accountability of MDAs, and we think that's a very beautiful thing, that came in to ensure that MDAs are more accountable, as well, whether it's in the procurement function or whether as it relates to the ongoing verification of the payment system, or whether it's even in response to what the cost to revenue ratios should be. And I think these are other ways of closing some of the loopholes that exist in funding our budget. But a critical one that we must do as a country is aligning our fiscal policies and our monetary policies. Sometimes they look as if they're going in different direction. While, the fiscal policy is trying to generate more revenue, you find the monetary policy sort of counteracting, the fiscal policy. So I think an alignment and a synergy is needed to ensure that, we grow our tax revenue. Then back to your question, what are the safeguards that are in place? One of the things that taxpayers have told us over the years is that I don't want an external system connecting to my system. So therefore, the FRS itself, we're developing in-house technology. So we're not doing, as a tax administration, one of the things that the executive chairman has said to us is that it's not going to be pick and plug. So we're not going to pay and plug. We're looking at our environment, what is peculiar to our environment, and we're developing solutions that are necessary for our environment, and also realizing that data privacy is very, very key. We've put in several safeguards, even entrenched in the law. You can go to jail as a taxman if you divulge information at your disposal. So those are safeguards that have been put, in the law to ensure that there's confidentiality of data, there's data protection for the taxpayers. They are comfortable, with the data that they are releasing to the tax authorities. They are comfortable with the technology that we will be adopting and, fitting to make tax administration easier for us as a country. Thank you.
Well, looking at national, subnationals, initially I raised a concern, which is, are they properly mainstreamed? Is there a synergy that flows in all this? Besides you being a tax expert, I'm privileged to know you are sometime chairman of the National Board of Internal Revenue. Now, how best can there be a perfectly created synergy? So we have a flow, because most times we have what we call functional overlaps and some kind of conflicts that don't seem to agree.
Well, in some circumstances, the situation you are actually expressing calls for double taxation in some circumstances. And that is actually a serious problem both to the federal and the state. If you look at some of the activities that our commercial men take, you take heapers of cow from Maiduguri, you are going to Imo State or Lagos, for instance. If you pass at each level of the state, they will be paying tax. And that will increase the cost of such product. And the moment they get in there, it becomes expensive for the people therein. And if it's expensive, it means life will no longer be easy for some people, and they will make their profit match. And the problem we're having is, you see, the concept of federalism is what's actually creating now the problems between the state and the federal. But however, the laws are spelled out outrightly. Just like we know that the Taxes and Levies Collection Act, Act 21 of 1998, spelled out precisely on the exclusive list what is to be collected by the federal government. In view of the federalism, most of the heavy loaded taxes are collected by the federal government. Now, it's also spelled out what is collectible by the state governments. And there are concurrent lists, just like you said. The Personal Income Tax Act is collected by both the federal and the state. Capital gains tax too. But there is no way they get mixed up because the law has spelled it out. The Capital Gains Act states that capital gains from companies are collectible by the federal. Capital gains from the state, from individuals, are being collected by the state. That is apparent. There is no mix up there. But the problem I used to say is that this law we are having, just like my colleague actually said, they need an overhaul. We need to sit down. There shouldn't be any ambiguity at all. Like in recent time, maybe in the picture, the state governments have started now harmonizing their revenue laws, their tax laws, between the state and the local government. That just happened in Nasarawa State most recently. And the law has been established. Kaduna had done our own. Maiduguri had also done. Now there is harmony between the local government and the state.
what is remaining now for us to harmonize the state and the federal. But however, just like I said, this law needs to be looked at. Let me just give you an instance. If you go to Section 80 of the Personal Income Tax Act, gives the state governor the right of remission. A remission, what I mean by remission is that if the state governor says that the tax burden is high, he can decide to say, okay, I will reduce this, I will reduce this, I will reduce this, so that it will alleviate the problems of my people. You understand? So that is a problem in itself. Uniformity of the practice will not be longer there. And our 1961 Act, ITMA, Income Tax Management Act, was established to harmonize some of these tax laws. It means we are going back to yesteryears where issues are not there. However, I want to advise. Are we together?
Go ahead.
What I want to advise in the perspective of this taxation is that the first and foremost is the leadership, the governance, or the government, must have what you call political will.
Okay.
If the political will is there, that will now give a sound base for the tax practitioners to operate perfectly.
Okay, thank you. I hear our first caller tonight is calling from Lagos, Mohammed, Ghana. Hello, Mohammed. Oh, we lost that call. You concluded, okay?
Yeah, just like I was saying, I just want to advise, like I said, the state governors and the federal government must establish what we call political will. And if that political will is there, you see, for the fear of, I want second tenor, I want this, the governors and the federal, and probably the presidency may compromise on tax issues, on taxpayers. Maybe it's my brother, it's my this, it's my that. And the authority might not go to say, bring your tax. For one reason or the other, the fear will be there. But however, if that is taken care of, the tax authority itself must also have to develop a kind of confidence, and taxpayer education must be brought into limelight so that the taxpayers will be aware, of what they are supposed to be doing. In fact, with the Federal Inland Revenue Service, we have actually established two things, which is a global phenomenon now. Now, we have self-assessment. The taxpayer is supposed to assess himself, and he takes some benefits from doing that himself. So if he assesses himself, how can he do that? He must be knowledgeable. If he's not knowledgeable, he can't do it. So we must create an avenue or forum that will allow the taxpayer to have the ability to access himself and bring up his tax liability. Again, and we are talking about voluntary compliance. How does the taxpayer comply voluntarily? He must know what his money is going to be done with. You understand? So these are issues that have to be streamlined so that the tax collection could be perfected. Now, with what you have just said, like the experience I had, it's not easy for taxpayers to part with their money. As far as Nigeria is concerned, it's not easy. In fact, most states, even at the federal level, but in Lagos, to some extent, we have witnessed success. But in other states, it's not possible because a taxpayer doesn't know actually what his money is going for. Then there should not be that transparency from the government to show this is particularly projects. This is taxpayers' project. You show them this is what your money is going for. This is what we are doing with your money, and develop the confidence within the taxpayer so that he can also come out to say, I want to pay my tax.
Okay, we'll take our next line of reports, just three, then when we return, we'll begin with Professor Owaleke on other perspectives in conclusion of the program tonight. Our next report from Lafia, Nasarawa State, indicates that the authority there is rising to the challenge of apathy, involving measures to tackle issues of double taxation in order to bring more taxpayers into the tax net. The report.
Over the years, tax has been a major source of revenue for the execution of government projects and programs, in addition to statutory allocation and internally generated revenue, IGR, amongst others. In order to boost revenue base to fund 2021 budget in line with the Finance Act 2020 and to increase revenue drive, Experts say there is need to broaden tax system through a robust tax administration policies and strengthen enforcement. Residents say they always pay tax as at when due, but frowns at the challenges of multiple taxation, which has been affecting the flow of income in their businesses.
Employment rate, business premises, and about 6 taxations we are paying here. There are too many.
We are paying 3. Some are monthly, some are yearly. Guys, we pay once in a year.
They call on relevant authorities to monitor the process with the view to correct and strengthen the system for effective service delivery. The chairman, Nasarawa State Internal Revenue Service, Ahmed Yakubu Muhammad, notes that government is instituting appropriate tax payment system that will do away with double taxation and enhance tax collection mechanism to ease payers' challenges. He says the policy will benefit government and taxpayers, as he emphasizes the need for taxpayers to update, while new registration is commendable for feedback system to ensure regular communication for greater economic growth and development.
And from Asaba, in view of the fact that government has meted the idea of falling back to monies in dormant accounts and unclaimed dividends, citizens' compliance with tax regulation to enable government meet up with financing of the projects is the focus.
With the 2021 budget placed at 13.6 trillion naira, it behoves on the federal government to source funds to meet its revenue benchmark in its financing. Two of such ways are borrowing and taxation, which plays a vital role in financing public expenditures. Therefore, high rates of tax compliance by citizens could help maintain healthy public finance. This seems difficult as some persons, though gainfully employed, evade tax payment.
I pay my taxes as a responsible citizen here. You should know what that means. Your salary, your taxes are deducted from source. I do pay taxes, and I've got electronic tax card I was given when I paid.
Government is also culpable because despite having a huge workforce, the number of people in the tax net is said to be very low.
The government had a role to play by the policy directive of the government that make it conducive for people to be engaged in different productive sectors that will generate income. And by virtue of higher income, higher revenue will come, and by virtue of higher revenue, tax will be accelerated, and government will have sufficient money to bring back to the public in way of infrastructure facilities.
How can issues of tax evasions be handled and tax agencies made to remit appropriately to government coffers?
People evade tax for many reasons. They see that, why am I paying tax? Government is not using it. I'm not seeing what they are using it for. People who want to pay tax if and only if the central government will be able to account for the tax collected.
Stakeholders are of the view that for an economy to thrive and basic infrastructure needs provided for citizens, it is necessary for citizens to pay tax.
And from Jos, tax authorities in Plateau State say overcoming the challenge posed by the informal sector and expanding tax nets as well as improved automation of tax administration in the country will greatly impact revenue generation towards adequate budget funding. The report.
The advent of the coronavirus pandemic and the dwindling fortunes of the oil sector increased pressure on the economy, requiring a move towards the non-oil sector for enhanced revenue generation. The situation has opened up new ideas for businesses, with it, new revenue streams, and the FIRS is in the forefront of ensuring revenue generated are taxable and paid accordingly. The service is trying to close gaps arising from underassessment, as a number of policies have been introduced to improve tax administration in the country.
There are provisions of many like modern means to curb tax evasion and avoidance, and also to make tax payment to the taxpayers easy. By deploying technology, which are being introduced in phases, e-filing
taxpayer consider the comfort of their living room to file their tax returns, in the comfort of their offices to file tax returns.
The Plateau State Revenue Consolidation Law 2020 is providing a unified revenue administration structure that will help develop an integrated revenue administration towards improving ease of doing business, enhance voluntary compliance, and boost revenue generation.
The passage of our law, of the bill that was passed into law, every business, every enterprise, every association is expected to register with the state Internal Revenue Service.
Financial analysts and some taxpayers are advocating increased enlightenment.
They don't, and FRS is more like an enforcement agency, that emotions will come. But when the NOA takes it up, understand the import of this, and they pass the message across to people, in languages and in manners they can understand, it will bridge the knowledge gap.
The issue is not even about payment. The issue is about resolving issues. Because definitely the taxpayer have to really understand what is paying for.
However, they are optimistic that if tax bases are harnessed properly, it will enhance revenue generation on a sustainable basis and assist in funding the 2021 budget.
Just report is our last for today, and after them, Professor Wadeke. Expanding the tax net, the informal sector. Let me ask you a tricky question here. If the tax net keeps shrinking and the informal sector is not properly captured, also, could there be any time where we could go to fund the budget locally without going externally?
Yes, if the tax yield is dropping, while the informal sector is increasing, I just to tell you that there's a problem. This is a country where you have over 40 million micro, small, and medium enterprises. So that gives you an idea of the potential that this country has for ramping up tax revenue. If only that sector can be organized. Okay. Now, when you were doing your report on subnationals, I didn't hear you go to Imo. You didn't talk about my state.
We always juggle. We were in Imo State last week.
I see. But I listened to the report on the Southeast, and I didn't, Imo State wasn't there. But maybe I should share my little experience, because, at the state level, where I worked as a Commissioner for Finance, the governor I worked under, happened to be loan shy because of understandably, because the state was in huge debt, and so he didn't want to touch any loan. So we focused on ramping up IGR, because we recognized that IGR was even a basis for the horizontal allocation of money from the federation account. It was one of the criteria. IGR is also one of the criteria for even receiving World Bank grants under the state's fiscal transparency and accountability sustainability program of the World Bank, the SafeTax program. So IGR, is very important, and we recognize that, and so we focused on ramping up IGR. And fortunately, we had a very competent and experienced person, manning the Internal Revenue Service. And the first thing we did, was to ensure we had, we tried to get a reliable database of, taxable persons in the state. When we came, for example, there was no record of, say, the number of hotels in Imo. And Imo happens to be a state where you have the highest number of hotels in the southeast, but the records were not there, okay, for us to be able to do a proper, collection of revenue. And one of the things we also did to minimize this incidence of multiple taxation, or the perception of multiple taxation on the part of the taxpayer, was to consolidate the taxes, for each taxpayer under a central billing system. Of course, we automated, and from the little we were collecting, as I said, we were able to ramp up IGR, and from the much we were collected, the governor was doing roads. Okay, he was putting money in health, in education, building technical colleges. Okay, and so the voluntary compliance level, increased substantially. at the time, we were there. And so that's for, the state level. But whether at the state level or at the federal level, one thing is critical that has to be done, again, to ramp up tax revenue. And that's speaking to the ease of doing business. Ease of doing business is critical. There's a recent report, I saw, which said that just very few states were able to attract foreign investments into this country in 2020. Okay, very many states couldn't attract any. And if you don't have, businesses, if you don't have investments in your place, of course you don't expect your tax revenue, to be high. What is it that Kaduna State is doing well that other states should learn from? Kaduna State, is a shining example of a state that has successfully ramped up IGR. I'm not talking about Lagos State now. Okay, so, and that's because Kaduna State has worked on the ease of doing business. In terms of ease of registering business, ease of starting a business, whether it's even obtaining construction permits, okay, resolving insolvencies, dealing with enforcing contracts and all of that. So all that, have to be in place for businesses to thrive. So if you have more businesses in your states, if we have more businesses, more foreign investment in Nigeria, of course the tax base is being increased. We are in a position to also get more, more tax revenue. So ease of doing business is very critical. And I'm happy too that even as at the national level, the situation, has been, improving over time in terms of ease of doing business. What affected us as a country last year, was understandable, the COVID pandemic. But otherwise, if you look at the rankings, in terms of ease of doing business, we have been making some progress at the national level. Okay. I think we should sustain that. Then the other issue also has to do with, you talked about borrowing too, you mentioned borrowing again. But before borrowing, there's also the issue of privatization. Okay, if you look at the 2021 budget, the government says it intends to generate 205 billion naira from privatization proceeds to fund the budget. That to me is too small. We could do bigger than that. Okay, and that is if we can take up key assets of the government and partially privatize those assets, okay, through the Nigerian Stock Exchange, through the capital market, the government stands to, get more. So the government should. Or the critics will now see from the political mind, not the economic mind. No. You are. By wanting to stop that effort now. No. The attack is usually when you want to sell to individuals, when you want to sell public access to individuals. But when you want to sell to the public, that is where the stock exchange, comes in. You put it on the stock exchange, for example, and people like you and I, can buy shares. So that is a way to ensure that the public, participates in the fortune of such enterprises. Let's get the perspective for Professor Zuburu. Professor Zuburu, the 2021 budget is already on, the implementation is on. I know the effective date is somewhere in March. Yes, that's the capital component of 2020 budget will terminate by the end of March. Yes. There's no going back. The budget must be funded. Nigerians have to be served. So by way of, let's say, maybe you're trying to console Professor Waleke. What will you be saying? Another Nigerians.
Consoling him, I don't know how to console him in this perspective.
Just for instance.
The problem is our own problem altogether. Okay. So we have to console each other. The issue is, just like you said, there's no going back. We have to look for alternatives. We just have to open our eyes now to what would be performed by the Federal Revenue Service, because they are critically our target now. And we have been talking of informal sector. By the Nigerian tax system, the informal sector doesn't have anything to do in most circumstances with the federal collection, because it goes under personal income tax. Most of them are not incorporated. Most of these small businesses are not incorporated, and which means they are falling under the arms of the state government. You understand? So the federal budget now, we don't have much, except for those incorporated companies that have little capital base. Okay. In any event, just like you said, if there is no alternative in this circumstance, the borrowing has become evident. Okay. We cannot do without the borrowing. But however, just like he said, if we now borrow all those capital projects that you're talking about, they should be self-financed, self-funded, so that the moment such capital projects, excuse me, I think that is a project that's ongoing now between this Abuja towards Lafia. That project doesn't have any capital disposition by way of borrowing or otherwise. So it's meant to finance itself. Maybe at the end of the project, there will be a means of collection from users of the infrastructure, something like that. Okay. And again, there are other things that we have left behind. He has been talking of stock exchange, stock broking, and stock activities. You see, we have left out some of these collections far back. We need to go back to them. Like in 1998, it was abrogated, collection of capital gains tax from stocks. And this, the collection is with ease.
Don't go there.
It's okay.
Don't go there.
Just conclude.
But it will discourage, investments.
We don't have all the time.
Yeah. It's all right. But just like I said, so far as the system is concerned, we need to progress. Okay. And if it is very necessary, borrowing becomes eminent. Okay. The tax, as it is now, I don't think it will finance the desire of the federal government. They have to go a little borrowing, and you have to be cautious in the borrowing so that projects can finance themselves.
Okay.
That's my just take.
Albert, I believe you're still with us. If you can hear me quickly, you have heard Professor Zubeiru say, left or right, we have to move forward. What is your parting shot?
Well, I think for me, there has to be that example from the top. I see a situation where governors file their returns, from both federal and of course the president, people filing their returns. The income that is exempted from tax is the official emolument of the governors and the president, vice president. Other income, they have other income. They should show example filing their returns. And again, Professor mentioned about the informal sector. The informal sector is virtually untapped. There are so many things that looks more formal within the informal that is taking away revenue of government, and that area needs to be tapped. Again, we have too much incentive, like Professor Walike mentioned. Some of them are not really those that will encourage investment, whether they are there or not. You don't need to push people to foreign direct investment. It's not because of those. We have the market, we have, and whether we like it or not, they will come in and invest in Nigeria. So I think those are areas we need to look at. Let example be shown by those at the top, so that they also encourage the high net worth that they move around with regularly to also file their returns, so that the states can have money. The federal too will be able to have that money, particularly when everybody is involved and the culture of tax compliance is improved, so that we can show up this our tax to GDP ratio. Thank you very much.
Follow Shaw, Managing Consultant, Pedabo Professional Services. It was nice having you on Tuesday Live tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Let's go to Ehile. Ehile, Federal Revenue Service is critical here, whether borrowing, whether to generate revenue. Well, maybe at this point, let me appeal to you to speak to Nigerians to be available to assist the Federal Revenue Service generate the desired revenue to fund the budget.
Thank you so much, Omini. I often say that taxation is about a partnership. Whether it's between the taxpayer, the tax administrator, and the government. So one thing is clear, you need the support of both the taxpayers to make sure that your system is seamless, they pay the right taxes in terms of transparency. So we're counting on our taxpayers to make it a bit easy for us to collect, easy for us to administer. And as much as possible as tax administrators, we'll do our best as well to make sure that the system is also seamless for administration, seamless for collection, and we'll be transparent in what we collect. And that's one of the things we've been doing so far. We can show you how much we've collected over the years, into the various accounts of the government. We can show you what the tax dollars and what the tax revenue is doing, but more importantly, as well, as everyone has said, including Professor Zubeiru and Mr. Afolonsho, is the culture of leading by example, whether we're talking to our government officials, whether subnationals, our politicians. It's very, very important for us, to lead by example, because if there's no deterrence for bad behavior, it will continue. You mentioned that can we use internally generated revenue alone to fund our budget? The answer is yes. And Mr. Falonsho mentioned to us earlier that just employment taxes alone from South Africa last year was about 11 trillion. South Africa's population is less than 60 million people. So if they can collect 11 trillion for 60 million people in employment taxes alone, we're not talking about their mining taxes or their company income taxes or any other taxes or any other levies they've done. So as a country, we think that our wealth and our potential is hidden within us, and we can generate more. Finally, I would say, this whole conversation sometimes is beyond taxation. So there's also the need to balance, whatever you want to collect from taxation to our need for investments. So we must, as a country, ensure that we make sure that there's ease of doing business. We are a destination for investors. Thank you very much.
Tola Aigbebi, it was nice having you on Tuesday Live tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Back in Abuja, Professor Zubeiru, just in a few words, there's something about, like I would say, when it comes to electoral governance, election governance. If the entire country does not come out on the election day, what role would INEC play? So if the people are not available to pay tax, to be served, will they be in it? Just one word for the people.
There is a social contract between the people and the government. On the other side, if the people are not supplying the needed funds for the government to perform, it means they are at zero level. Because no governor, no president will bring his personal money to say he's going to fund government. He can't do it. He doesn't have it. Because he's governing the people, is the people that actually will support him to do the rightful things. So, in fact, if people refuse coming out to pay their taxes, apparently it means the government will be handicapped. And at the end of the day, it will be catastrophic.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's hear from you, Prof.
Yes. I want to recommend a carrot and stick approach, to this whole thing. You notice that our tax laws, including the recent Finance Act 2019-2020, contain penalties for tax default, okay, but no rewards. So it's high time we began to build rewards into our tax laws. We have companies that have consistently paid, their taxes. Most of these companies are quoted on the stock exchange. What sort of rewards do we have for them? COVID-19 provided an opportunity, for us to reward those companies. Those interventions, should have been, channeled to companies that in the past paid their taxes as and when due. Okay, so the point I'm making is that we should have a way too of saying you have done well. Okay, let's reward you either by way of returning part of what you paid before as an incentive. Okay, and not just focusing on punishment, on penalties. Ditto for the staff of FIRS. Those of them that have done well, exceeded their targets, should also be rewarded one way or the other.
Thank you so much, Professor Uwaneki, former Commissioner for Finance, Imo State, and Professor of Capital Market. It was nice having you on the program tonight.
My pleasure.
And also Professor Abdullahi Zubeiru, Professor of Accounting and Taxation, Nasarawa University. It was a pleasure having you on Tuesday Live tonight.
Thank you very much.
As on the program, we looked at funding the 2021 budgets. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
NTA, you can't beat the reach.
This week on Executive Discourse.
Because as we speak, I can be honest enough to tell that we have over 10,000 kilometers of waterway in this country. And it may also interest you to know that you can access 28 states of Nigeria by water. If you don't put into effective use our waterways, you cannot decongest our roads.
Selfishness is one word that is often considered negative. True. But do you know that there are moments when the same word is not only considered positive, but actually encouraged to be used? Yes, it is true. Find out how and when selfishness is acceptable from our delectable, bold and very vocal ladies only on Conversations. Join us this Wednesday at 9 a.m. and be a part of this conversation on NTA.